Hey, what is up guys? Welcome back to the MODC Architecture channel. Today I'm going to be making an interior model of a buffer space between an existing facade and my design proposal, my new design proposal. This is going to be analysing sort of what the space will look like and whether it's sort of viable. I'm going to do it into 1 to 100 scale, and it's going to be quite a hefty task, quite a long task, but I'm going to time-lapse it for you guys and sort of explain what I'm doing throughout the video and why I'm doing things and what materials I'm using, etc, etc. I really hope you enjoy. So it's really important to contextualise this model and why I'm making it. Predominantly the reason why I'm making this model is to create a sense of space between the existing facade, which is already on site, and the proposed facade of my new design. The reason why I'm using matches as the predominant material for the structure is because I'm quite environmentally driven. I'd really like to incorporate this into my design, so this really gives it a wooden materiality that I'd like the final design, the final building to have. Another important reason to making this model is to show to allow interfacing programs between the existing and the new facade. By interfacing programs, I mean programs which are linked together through a buffer space or are just linked together. And it's the linking together of these programs which is what's gonna make this project so interesting. Well, we hope to be interesting, because at the end of the day we want to impress our tutors and we want to impress them with interesting and different ideas perhaps. I'm doing this model at 1 to 100 because it will really give me an idea spatially of what goes where and how things work together, on the face of the facade at least, and then that will allow me to explore things in depth later on with more detailed models. Moving on to the next stage of this modelling process, I've now started cutting out the skin for the proposed facade. The reason why I'm using paper is just for quick cutting, making this quick sketch model so that I can identify the space and then move on from it, sketch from it, etc, etc. But we'll move on to those processes potentially in a later video, if you guys like to see that. However, back to this, I'm now cutting out a slit to represent sort of the glass work in this buffer space, because my proposed building has 2 floors of sort of normal dimensions from the ground up, and then the 3rd floor has a sort of recedes a little bit because I've got to allow sunlight into the path that I'm creating with making this threshold between new and existing building. Now here I'm adding the wooden structures to this facade skin, or representation of facade skin, so that I'm getting a real feel for how the buffer space could potentially look with the wood and with the materiality of the acrylic paper. I can sort of decide whether I really want a rendered finish on my buffer space proposed facade, or whether I want something different. What I'm doing here is I'm actually creating pathways between the proposed facade and the existing facade. These pathways will allow the programs to sort of be interfacing, and will add a circulation element to the buffer space. So it's not just this glass tool sort of structure, it's actually got a purpose to the building, and it really will help pull parts of the existing facade away from that structure and allow me to input programmatic elements into my proposed building, and vice versa, therefore making the design sort of have a bit more interest to it, and will allow me to play a bit more, or play around with it a bit more later on in the design process. So in this part of the model making process, I'm now using an opaque material instead of paper or wooden matches to identify the pathways in the buffer space facade as a different material. My intention is to use a different material while creating the final design. Therefore, I'm showing this, or this intention at least, through material representation in this model. Now on to what can only be described as the incredibly fiddly bit of this design, apart from the matches, that is. I'm making the staircase now, and I've got to score the paper in order to... Well, first I need to measure the staircase, and make sure that's all correct. Make sure it's, I think it was 0.2 millimeters translated as the correct rise and going of the staircase itself, of the steps even. And what I needed to do was fold these into small steps, and as you can see, it's not the best attempt at it, but it's an attempt nonetheless, and it's just the representational elements that I'm looking to do in the sketch model. However, I've used Yoo-Hoo glue, which I'd highly recommend as a model making material, as a model making adhesive. It's incredible. It's really good. Really, it's not that messy, and it sticks really fast, and it's easy to move around. But I've connected the staircase to 2 different paths to show a circulatory element to the buffer space, and now I'm cutting out the separate pathways that will go on other levels of the design. After completing the construction of the proposed facade, I've now gone and got a laser cutting, which you saw briefly. However, I'll go over how to create a laser cutting file in another video. I'm now cutting out the existing facade, or a representation of the existing facade, to the correct 1:100 scale, and I'm doubling up the material so that it gives a bit more of a dense element to it, because obviously there's an entire building behind it, so I've got to represent that somehow. And I also wanted to make it a bit more structurally sound as it stands on the wooden model, or the wooden laser cutting, which you can see there. Now, it's really important to sort of have a reference point, or perhaps a previous design to work from, and what I'm doing there when I move away is I'm looking back at my computer and looking at a computer model that I've made in Rhino. Again, Rhino, an incredible piece of software that I'd highly recommend you use. Again, another video which I can talk to you a bit more in depth about. But I continue to cut I think this is the commercial element of the existing facade, cutting that out, making sure I'm sticking those together again with Yoo-Hoo glue so that there's no mess, easy, and I'm using a something to spread it, which will mean that there's no sort of gaps or air pockets, that there's nice clean finish to the model. Even though it's a sketch model, you still want it to look vaguely good, you still want it to look fairly good. And now I'm sticking it down to the wooden base. Now the wooden base I'm using is 4mm MDF, nice cheap material to use while you're doing your laser cutting, and I'm propping up the paper facade against some sellotape just to make sure it stays in place, stays where I want it. And I've taken that away, and as you can see, it's dried very quickly. That was about a couple of minutes in real time. I've obviously sped this up quite a lot, but yeah, it's a couple of minutes, and now I'm going through the process of sticking down the proposed facade, and I propped that up with the super glue that I was using previously. I'm now sticking the buffer space circulatory elements, I suppose you could call it that, to the existing and the new facade, and this model really is now coming together, and we're in the final stages of making it. This is about, I would say, 3 hours into the process. It's taken me a long time to make all these elements, I know, but a lot of it was quite fiddly, especially with the matchsticks and the laser cutting. I had to wait for it to be laser cutted and to do the laser cutting file itself, but it's all in the process, and it's all an effective way of getting across your main ideas and intentions for the next stages of your design. So as we approach finishing the model, I'm actually going to question whether this was an effective representation of the buffer space. I would argue it is, because I've really shown the volume, or at least the dimensions, of the existing and the proposed facades, and I've shown the routes people have to take in order to circulate between these two buildings, and I think I've shown it quite successfully. It is rough, there are improvements to be made, definitely, but that's what design development's all about. And this is a really important phase of the design process where you're really bringing your ideas together through sketching, modelling, computer modelling in the final stages. You know, I've been criminal in the sense that I've just been computer modelling. I haven't been doing any sketching, any hand modelling. This is the first hand model I've made of this design proposal, of this project. However, last year I made model after model, and it really was successful for me, so I don't really know why I've drifted away. Maybe it's the third-year mentality of everything has to be really neat and tidy. I'll definitely look to improve on that in the next coming weeks. But here is the finished model. Yes, finished, all ready to go, photographed and put into Pages. But yeah, everyone, that's it from me today. Really hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, hit the like button. And if you didn't, hit the dislike button. Let me know why in the comments below so I can look to improve my content. I really hope you enjoyed having a little insight into how I work, how I make my sketch models, and maybe you took a little bit away from that and it will help you. Who knows? That's what I'm looking to do. And make sure to check out my Instagram, Matthew Cooper Architecture, and my website, www.modcarchitecture.com. Have a good one and take it easy.